Hello guys, thank you so much for coming back to watch another video on my channel. Now Capcom already confirmed they're going to continue the same trend of remaking the old Resident Evil titles, and we eventually going to see Resident Evil 5 Remake down the line. However, the game came out in Xbox 360 era, so what changes do we need to see and what improvements we need to see in Resident Evil 5 Remake? Let's find out together in this video. Now if you do end up on this channel and you did like this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. There's no cost and it will allow me to make more of these videos for you guys. Resident Evil 5 Remake is one of the most anticipated remakes which has been requested by Resident Evil fans and the community, along with the Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake and Resident Evil 1 Remake. Now Capcom has been listening to the fans and the community, and they've conducted a recent interview with IGN, and they confirm that they're going to continue the same trend of doing remakes of the previous old titles, more specifically Resident Evil old games. Now at the end of Resident Evil 4 Remake, it has been alluded that Albert Wesker is planning something big, and he's planning to wipe out 1 billion human life by introducing to a brand new virus, which we all know it's going to be Ouroboros, and we're going to be able to see that Albert Wesker is going to make a return, which confirms that the next remake Capcom is eyeing on is actually Resident Evil 5 Remake. Now Resident Evil 5, when it originally came out, it was a game which was actually quite successful. However, this was the first game which was actually changing the set tone which was set by the previous Resident Evil titles, from a survival horror game to an action horror game. Now since that time, the games in general, and more specifically Resident Evil titles, has evolved with time, and there's going to be changes we're going to be seeing in Resident Evil 5 Remake, because that came out on Xbox 360 era, and that time the games were popular, but the games has changed, and how the game mechanics work is completely different. So it makes sense that Capcom is going to make those adjustments and those changes to make sure and ensure that Resident Evil 5 Remake is as successful as Resident Evil 4 Remake has been. So here's a list of changes I would expect Capcom to make in Resident Evil 5 Remake to ensure that the game is also successful and fit in with the more recent Resident Evil titles. I think the most annoying part for me when I originally played Resident Evil 5 was actually your AI partner Shiva. Now the AI was terrible in Resident Evil 5, especially if you're not playing with your friend. Now if you're playing with your friend, your experience would be different, and it was the same for me, that I've managed to finish the game with my mate about 3 times on Xbox 360, and for me the experience playing with your friend as a co-op mechanic was actually really good. But seeing that, I think they could have done a better job, but I think they were just trying to include this co-op element into the main number titled, and I think it kind of works. But as I said, if you played with your friend with, let's say, on a LAN or a split screen, then your experience would have been different for you. Now since that time, Capcom has already improved on the AI mechanics in the recent Resident Evil titles. We've seen that in Resident Evil 4 Remake. So I want the same thing with Resident Evil 5 Remake, that they would give us the option of either to play solo, where you can just completely clock the game by yourself as Chris Redfield or let's say Shiva. But if let's say that's not the option, then I want to see an improvement in the AI mechanics. I don't want to get annoyed again, and I think Capcom does know that. They already made those adjustments with Resident Evil 4 Remake, so I'm hoping that Capcom would do the justice with Shiva character in the upcoming Resident Evil 5 Remake. When Resident Evil 5 came out, QTE scenes were actually quite a thing in the games, especially in the action or more modern games or more AAA games, because they were trying to capture this blockbuster sort of style in the video game, where you just do a button mashing and you get to see this cutscene in a very slow motion in front of you, and I think that's what they try to do a lot with Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. However, this is not a thing of 2023 and more modern games. This is something we don't expect and see from the most modern games these days. And they also already made those adjustments with Resident Evil 4 Remake, where you see Krauser and Leon's fight, and you don't actually have to button mash, you actually get to play those segments. So I think QTE scenes is something we don't want to see in Resident Evil 5 Remake. And especially those turret scenes where you actually get to shoot all of these Majanis, and I think that actually destroyed the experience for me when I was playing Resident Evil 5. So I think I don't want to see that from Resident Evil 5 Remake, and I think Capcom is already aware that how much that was actually a worst part of Resident Evil 5, and I don't think if they're going to do a remake that they're going to bring it back, especially what they have been doing with the new direction they've been taking with the more recent Resident Evil titles. Resident Evil 5 had a potential where they could have done a lot of backtracking, where you could have had this merchant instead of this gun shop at the end of each chapter scene, and I think that could have elevated the gameplay mechanics and elevated the game in general. You could have added more puzzles. I think they were more environmental puzzles, but it wasn't in the same style as the previous Resident Evil games were. So I think they can add more of this exploration where you can actually get to backtrack, you can have a brand new merchant, you can add more of the puzzles, which I think is a thing which has came back from the original Resident Evil games, and I love it because I personally prefer to do puzzle solving while I'm also trying to survive. So I think this is something which can actually give a plus point to Resident Evil 5 Remake. And Resident Evil 5 Remake can follow the same footsteps of Resident Evil 8 Village and Resident Evil 4 Remake, where you actually get to find all of these treasures, and when you find those treasures you can sell them to the merchant, which you can add in this game, and then the merchant in exchange can provide you with power-ups where you can upgrade your weapons or new items which you can use in the game, which can elevate the gameplay mechanics. Now the day setting for Resident Evil 5 was the reason as to why it was being criticized as in shifting the tone away from what the previous Resident Evil titles were. Even the Resident Evil 4 was set at the night time at the majority of the game, and I think Resident Evil 5 being in the broad daylight didn't help with the environment, even though it looked really good at that time. But for the gameplay mechanics and what Resident Evil games used to be, it never gave the hint of getting scared from these Maginis. Now if you change this setting, that would actually change the whole perspective and how the gameplay mechanics work, and this change in the tone would actually immerse the players more into the game, and it would provide a brand new perspective on the environment which we've seen in Resident Evil 5 and we would be able to see in Resident Evil 5 Remake, just due to the lighting itself. Especially with the RE engine, they can do a lot better job with showcasing the graphics and showcasing the lighting system. So I think it would be perfect to do with the Resident Evil 5 Remake, rather than going back to the broad daylight situation. I think it didn't work in favour of Resident Evil 5. A lot more backstory is going to help elevate the gameplay mechanic and the story of the Resident Evil 5 Remake. There's a lot of things which we could have added for Albert Wesker, which now you can do with Resident Evil 5 Remake. Same thing can be done about Jill Valentine, as how Chris and Jill Valentine goes against Albert Wesker, but we don't know the backstory, and it just only been showed through flashback and just on the backdrop. So I think if we get to see the mechanics and we actually get to play those segments as Jill Valentine, would actually improve on the overall experience we're going to get from Resident Evil 5 Remake. And we can add more interaction between Spencer and Albert Wesker and how they work together, and how Albert Wesker actually become a power freak, which we're going to see in Resident Evil 5 Remake. And these characters, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine and Albert Wesker, share a lot of their backstory. They're the ones who started the whole Resident Evil genre. So there's a lot of backstory which we can explore, and I think Resident Evil 5 Remake would be the perfect title to go back to do it, even through flashback scenes where you can actually get to play those segments. And the same way, Shiva requires a lot of backstory which we have not seen in Resident Evil 5, and it would allow us to see how they become the members of BSAA and how Trisel has also been doing a lot of this dodgy work in the background in Africa. So I think Capcom is going to make those improvements by adding all of these backstories to these characters to elevate the gameplay experience for the new players. And lastly, shifting the tone from action horror to a survival horror game. I think there's also the problem with the Resident Evil 5 originally was that the difficulty mechanic wasn't very great, because at some points the game felt very easy and at some points it was very difficult. So if you shift this tone from an action horror to survival horror, just look at the example of Alan Wake, from Alan Wake 1 to Alan Wake 2, how this game has improved so much just by shifting the tone. And if they try to do that with Resident Evil 5 Remake, and by adjusting the difficulty mechanics and adding all of those backtracking moments, I think this game is going to be a massive success in the same way as Resident Evil 4 Remake. And I think Resident Evil 5 does require the same sort of justice as they did with Resident Evil 4 Remake, and I would hope that they would do exactly the same with the Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake. But I think survival horror is the key element of the whole Resident Evil franchise, and I think going back to it with Resident Evil 5 Remake would give them a lot of success with this title, which a lot of people who've never played it, so they will be able to get the chance to play this game with the brand new graphics. And also the old school Resident Evil fans who've never touched or played Resident Evil 5 can actually get on board due to the shift they're going to do with this tone with the Resident Evil 5 Remake, and it would allow them and open the window for more Resident Evil remakes to come and be more successful by following the same pattern. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with the points I've raised and mentioned in the video, and which points I haven't covered? Please do let me know in the comment section down below in this video. So that's it for the video, guys. I'll catch you again with another video on my channel. Until then, look after yourself. Have a good one.